Millionaire CEO Victoria Harrington wakes up in an unknown council flat, without memory, next to James, a widowed construction worker with an 8-year-old daughter. "Where am I?" she whispers, confused. But when she discovers that this stranger saved her life, and that she herself has lost everything because of her business partner, she'll have to choose: return to her world of luxury, or stay with this family that has shown her what it means to truly love. The truth that emerges will change everyone's destiny forever. The golden afternoon light of London filtered through the worn curtains of the third-floor flat. The peeling walls painted sage green, the 1980s Formica furniture, the ceiling stained with damp from the Tower Hamlets council estate, told stories of working-class life, of families who struggled each day to make ends meet. Victoria Harrington opened her eyes slowly, her head pounding like a pneumatic drill. The world around her was completely unfamiliar. No polished marble, no designer paintings, no panoramic view of London. Just a sagging sofa, the smell of tea brewing, and a sense of complete bewilderment. "Where am I?" she murmured with a hoarse voice. James Mitchell turned from the window where he was hanging his daughter's washing. His 38 years showed in the tired lines around his brown eyes, in the calloused hands of a builder, in the body still strong but marked by endless work shifts and sleepless nights as a single father. He'd found her 3 nights before in the pouring rain on Commercial Street, unconscious and soaked, with only a Hermes handbag and a dead phone. No one had stopped to help her in the working-class neighborhood, no one except him returning from the night shift at the building site. James explained everything with the simplicity of someone accustomed to concrete facts, not complicated words. She listened incredulously, studying that honest face which contrasted totally with the suited men from her financial world. Emily, 8 years old, appeared from the kitchen with messy plaits and her school pinafore stained with jam. Her curious eyes sparkled with the same light that had made her mother Sarah unique, who had died 2 years earlier from cancer that had devoured James's savings and broken the heart of a girl too young to understand why Mummy wasn't coming home anymore. Emily's presence immediately changed the tense atmosphere. The little girl offered tea with the naturalness of someone who had learned early to care for others, smiling with that spontaneous sweetness that Victoria hadn't seen for years in her power circles. Whilst the little one ran to prepare the tea, Victoria observed James with new eyes. There was no calculation in his gestures, no hidden interest. Just genuine kindness that completely disarmed her. That evening, sitting at the Formica table eating shepherd's pie prepared by Emily, Victoria felt part of something she had never experienced. A real family, where relationships weren't based on contracts or conveniences, but on authentic affection. But outside the window, a black car with tinted windows remained parked in the shadows, and someone was watching her with growing attention. The following days unfolded with rhythms Victoria had never known. Tea from the pot at 6 in the morning, James leaving for the building site with packed sandwiches prepared the night before, Emily singing whilst having breakfast before going to school. The CEO, who had always controlled million-pound investments, now found herself fascinated by the simplicity of a life where every gesture had meaning. James worked on 3 different building sites to guarantee Emily everything a motherless child could want. Never complaining, never making his sacrifices feel burdensome. Victoria discovered that the flat was full of photos of Sarah, James's deceased wife. In each image, genuine love shone through, simple and profound. Sarah always smiled, with her hands on Emily or James, radiating that authentic happiness that Victoria had always sought, without finding it in her professional successes. In the afternoons, when Emily returned from school, Victoria found herself helping with homework. She, who directed international meetings, now patiently explained times tables, feeling useful in a completely different way than usual. The child asked direct questions with the curiosity typical of her age, questions that penetrated Victoria's heart more than any financial analysis. Why didn't she have children? Why did she always live alone? Why couldn't she cook? Each answer revealed to Victoria how empty her life had been despite success. She had chosen career over family, power over love, independence over bonds. Now, sitting in that tiny kitchen, she realized she had lost the most important things. James returned every evening at 6, tired but always smiling when he saw Emily, and increasingly often, her too. His eyes lit up when he found Victoria helping his daughter, as if that female presence filled a void he had learned to hide, but not to heal. In the evenings, they ate together, talking about Emily's day, her drawings, her little friends. Victoria felt part of a family for the first time in her life, wrapped in a warmth that no luxury had ever been able to give her. But that night, Victoria's phone suddenly rang, brutally returning her to the reality of her world. The voice of Robert Sterling, her business partner, filled the flat with news that would destroy everything. HSBC had withdrawn the $200 million investment. There were irregularities in the accounts. Her empire was crumbling whilst she played happy families. Robert's call shattered the spell like lightning on a serene day. Victoria moved away from the kitchen, where James and Emily continued laughing together, unaware of the earthquake devastating her life. Robert spoke of financial disaster, investigations, the entire Harrington capital empire that risked collapsing within hours. She had to return immediately, abandon this parenthesis of normality, and plunge back into the hell of international business. Victoria looked towards the kitchen, where James was teaching Emily to make toad in the hole. Two completely opposite worlds clashed in her mind. On one side, the urgency of her million-pound business. On the other, this family that had welcomed her without asking for anything in return. That night, she couldn't sleep. James noticed and joined her in the kitchen at 3 a.m, finding her sitting at the table with a mug of warm milk, staring at Sarah's photos. Without saying a word, James sat beside her. His silent presence was more comforting than any motivational speech she'd ever heard in boardrooms. He didn't ask pressing questions, didn't demand explanations. He was simply there, solid and reassuring as a rock. It was James who broke the silence, confessing he hadn't met someone like her for a long time. Someone strong but also fragile. Someone who needed to be protected but had never had it. His words touched Victoria's heart more than any declaration of love she'd ever received. James had seen beyond the facade of the successful CEO, had sensed the vulnerable woman hiding behind designer suits and ruthless decisions. The next morning, James accompanied her to the tube station. He gave her his number written on paper, promising that if she needed anything at all, she could call him. Emily came running and hugged her tight, making her promise she'd come back soon to visit them. Victoria felt her heart break, leaving that child who in just a few days had become more important than all the million-pound contracts of her career. On the train to the center, watching London slide past the window, Victoria realized she was traveling between two parallel universes. The council estates of Tower Hamlets gave way to the glass towers of Canary Wharf, symbol of the financial success she had dedicated her life to. But when she arrived at the Harrington capital offices, the discovery awaiting her would forever change the course of her existence. The penthouse on the 40th floor of Canary Wharf, with its panoramic view of London and polished marble, seemed to belong to another life. Victoria crossed those spaces she had dominated for 15 years, now transformed into a financial battlefield. Robert awaited her alongside 2 officers from the Serious Fraud Office. The preventive seizure of company assets was already underway. Computers sealed, accounts frozen, documents confiscated. The Harrington capital empire was crumbling under the weight of devastating accusations. The discovery hit like a punch to the stomach. 200 million had vanished from HSBC accounts, and all the transfers bore her electronic signature. Robert, the man she considered a brother, had used her codes to steal and cover failed investments. When Victoria confronted him, Robert collapsed, confessing everything. He'd lost money gambling, made disastrous investments, covered losses by siphoning company funds.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
Victoria's electronic signature had been duplicated months earlier when she trusted him blindly. The handcuffs on her wrists were just official confirmation of what Victoria already understood. Her life was destroyed. The newspapers would speak of financial scandal. Her assets would remain under seizure for years. The reputation built through decades of work was ruined forever. 24 hours later, released on bail, Victoria found herself alone in her luxury flat in Kensington, now sealed by creditors. She had lost everything: money, company, reputation, future. She was completely alone in that golden world that had proven as fragile as glass. That's when the phone rang. Emily's voice was like a ray of sunshine on a stormy day. The child had sensed her sadness through the phone and, with the innocent wisdom of children, offered the only thing she could give: unconditional love. James took the phone and, without asking questions, without judging, simply told her to come home. Not to her flat, not to theirs. Home. As if she already belonged to that family, as if her place had always been there. That night, Victoria took the tube to Tower Hamlets with just 1 suitcase. She had left everything else: designer clothes, jewelry, symbols of a life that now seemed empty and superficial. She was returning to the only family that had ever accepted her for who she really was. But Robert, desperate and hunted by justice, had discovered where she was hiding. And he had no intention of facing the consequences of his betrayal alone. James's flat at 10:30 p.m. was wrapped in domestic quiet. Emily slept peacefully in her bedroom, whilst Victoria and James sat on the sofa. She curled against him as he gently stroked her hair. For the first time in weeks, Victoria felt safe. James had promised they would face the legal situation together, that he would find a way to prove her innocence. It didn't matter that she could no longer afford expensive barristers. He was willing to fight for her. James confessed she had become everything to him, that Emily had found peace since she'd arrived in their lives. It was as if Sarah had sent Victoria to complete their broken family, to fill the void her death had left. But the tender moment was brutally interrupted by the explosion of the front door. Robert burst into the flat with 2 armed men, drunk and desperate. His bloodshot eyes told of days spent fleeing police and drowning in alcohol. Robert wanted Victoria to come back with him, to publicly declare herself an accomplice to his crimes. In exchange, he would share the money hidden abroad with her. If she refused, all 3 would have an accident. James instinctively placed himself in front of Victoria, protecting her with his body. He wasn't a violent man, but he was prepared to do anything to defend his family. When Robert threatened him with the gun, James didn't back down an inch. Emily woke to the shouting and appeared in the bedroom doorway, terrified to see those armed men in her living room. When Robert noticed the child, his plan became even more cruel. He would use Emily to force Victoria to obey. James lunged at Robert in a desperate attempt to protect his daughter. but one of the men struck him violently with the gun butt. He collapsed bleeding whilst Emily ran to him crying. That's when Victoria found courage she didn't know she possessed. She looked Robert in the eyes and told him she would sacrifice herself for this family, because James and Emily had given her something all her million-pound businesses had never managed to give: true love. Police sirens filled the night. Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor, had called the Metropolitan Police, hearing the commotion. In Tower Hamlets, they protected each other, formed community against dangers. Robert and his accomplices were arrested whilst the building was surrounded. As they took him away, Robert screamed it wasn't over, but Victoria knew it really was finished. Her past of lies and betrayals was closing definitively. 6 months later, James's flat had maintained its simplicity, but breathed a completely different atmosphere. Laughter filled the rooms more often. Silences were charged with complicity, and Victoria's presence had brought a serenity that had been missing since Sarah died. The trial had completely proven Victoria's innocence. Robert had confessed everything in exchange for a reduced sentence, and HSBC had not only returned all the money, but offered a multi-million compensation for reputational damage suffered. But Victoria had made a decision that surprised everyone, even James. She had refused most of the compensation, keeping only what was needed to buy a larger house in Tower Hamlets and realize a project close to her heart. The Sarah Center rose where an old abandoned building once stood. Victoria had wanted to dedicate it to Sarah's memory, the woman who had raised Emily in love and who, in some mysterious way, had shown her the path to that family. The center offered support to families in difficulty, free after-school activities for children, legal advice for those who couldn't afford it, professional training courses for those who had lost jobs. It was Victoria's way of giving back to the neighborhood what she had received. The opening was held on a spring Sunday. The whole neighborhood participated with the enthusiasm of those who knew that Center would become an important reference point. Mrs. Patterson had prepared her famous steak and kidney pie. The baker had donated scones for everyone. Children ran between tables, coloring the walls with their drawings. Victoria gave a simple but heartfelt speech. She told how a year before she was a successful CEO, but completely alone. How she had thought success was measured in money and power. Instead, she had discovered it was measured in smiles, hugs, and people waiting for you at home in the evening. James and Emily applauded proudly from the front row. Emily wore a new dress bought for the occasion, but her eyes sparkled with the same light as always, that light which had enchanted Victoria from the first day. That evening, sitting on the terrace of their new, more spacious flat, but still in Tower Hamlets, James asked Victoria if she had any regrets about leaving her old life of luxury. Victoria looked at Emily playing with her collection of colored stones, then at James, who watched her with the love she'd seen in Sarah's photos. Her answer was simple and definitive. The only regret was not finding the way home sooner. James kissed her tenderly, whilst Emily ran to hug them both, completing the embrace of a family that destiny had brought together in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what really matters. And sometimes the perfect family finds you when you least expect it. In a humble home in a working-class neighborhood, with a man with calloused hands and a girl with dark curls who teach you that true love can't be bought at any price. It's lived every day with infinite gratitude. Has this story touched your heart? Has it made you believe that true love can be born in the most unexpected moments, and that the greatest wealth is having a family that loves you? If you too believe that authentic happiness isn't found in money, but in the people who stand by us, that the courage to start from scratch can lead to the most beautiful life, and that love knows how to recognize love even in the humblest homes, give it a like and share this video. Tell us in the comments, have you ever had to choose between success and love? Do you believe it's possible to start completely from scratch? Do you know stories of people who found happiness just when they had lost everything? Share your experiences and let's get this message of hope to as many people as possible. Because sometimes the richest life begins just when you think you've lost everything, and the family of the heart always finds you when you need it most. Subscribe for more stories that prove true love always wins. Like, comment, share, and subscribe for stories that celebrate the power of authentic love.